Hey guys, Rock Papa here. Let's ID some more rocks. And yes, Tony of the River, you are right. Winter has come back on us. Okay, here's a rock. Let's just have a look at it. What minerals do you see? Well, I just see one mineral. And this whole rock is made of one mineral, mainly one mineral. And that would be quartz, sand-sized quartz grains. So, if that's all we got here, do you see any metamorphic banding? Not really. Does this look crystalline at all? Nope. So it's probably not a metamorphic rock. Mostly sand, not a metamorphic rock. Mostly sand-sized grains. So what are you going to call this? Yep, sandstone. And there's iron in here too. And usually sandstone, which is a sedimentary rock. The sand grains are held together by a glue, I guess you could say a glue, and that glue is usually going to be either iron or it's going to be calcium carbonate, that sort of thing. Two of the ubiquitous minerals or elements, whatever you want to call them. Iron in nature is a mineral, and so is calcium carbonate, which is calcite. Okay, let's get it good. This is Pennsylvanian sandstone from the Pennsylvanian period, which was about 330 million years ago to 300 million years ago. And that was when the Alleghanian orogeny was occurring, the time when Africa crashed into ancient North America. Africa shoved up on top of it, creating these gigantic mountains, I guess you could call them the Alleghanian Mountains, maybe Himalayan size. Downward pressure from these ancient mountains created a basin between the mountains and the North American continent called a foreland basin. First, some limestone developed in the shallow areas of the basin as erosion continued. Mud was deposited, then silt, and then sand. That created a massive sandy coastal plain with sandy beaches that migrated to the west and northwest across the North American continent. The sand made it all the way to the Mississippi River and beyond, even though a lot of it has been eroded away. Where do you find this Pennsylvanian sandstone? You find it in the Cumberland Plateau, which is a big plateau that's on the northwest side of the Valley and Ridge province. Up further north, it's called the Appalachian Plateau and the Allegheny Plateau. And this is a big stack of sedimentary rocks that are capped off by sandstone. So the Cumberland Plateau, where's a good place to see this? Any place on the Cumberland Plateau you can find this sandstone. Lookout Mountain in Georgia and in Tennessee, where some important Civil War battles were fought. You can also find this rock at Cumberland Gap National Park. In the park, you're standing at the base of this massive Cumberland Plateau escarpment. It's very majestic, in my opinion. Rises up about 800 or 1,000 feet above the Ridge and Valley province. Cumberland Gap is where Daniel Boone went through in the 1770s, I think it was, and created the Wilderness Road, a famous Wilderness Road. Also, if you go further to the northeast, you come to Big Stone Gap in Virginia. And it is also a gap in the Cumberland Mountains. This is also the setting for the series of books that I love called, especially the one called The Trail of the Lonesome Pine, which sounds a little outdated, but it's by John Fox Jr., who was born and raised in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. And that's a wonderful story, in my opinion. I love romance stories, and That's a great one. It's about the romance between an engineer back in the early 1900s and a mountain girl, and it's also about the feuding that has been documented for that area. Okay, and you can keep on going northeast and just follow the Cumberland Mountains. Okay, here's our next rock. So you got the gist of it. What do you see? I see a matrix of sand and silt-sized particles, kind of gray, with very smooth, rounded hunks of quartz. And these are quartz hunks, even though they're white. Since this is a sedimentary rock, right? So these quartz hunks have weathered out of, say, granite or granite gneiss or some other felsic or intermediate rock and been rolled and tumbled in a stream. There's no feldspar in here because these rocks have were rolled and tumbled many, many miles over a long period of time, and the feldspar weathered out into clay-sized particles. Now, we looked at what I called turbidite sandstone before. Turbidite sandstone is a material that's rapidly washed into a rift basin or something similar, and it's all mixed up size-wise, kind of like this, but the particles are not so smooth and they're angular because they haven't spent a lot of time been rolling and tumbling in a river, and also there's feldspar in there, which tells you the material didn't spend a lot of time in the river before it got dumped into the basin. So this is not turbidite sandstone. So what is it? It is called river conglomerate. River conglomerate. And like the name says, this river conglomerate was formed in rivers that were washing down from mountains. These are big particles of quartz mostly that were weathered out of the rock in the mountains. The rivers took that rock and began to erode it away and push it down the river. So what happens is you've got this matrix of mud, river bottom, but these hunks of quartz are heavy, and so they settle down on the bottom of the river, intermixed with this matrix. So you can also find a lot of river conglomerate in the Cumberland Plateau area, which would represent the river bottoms. If you go to Cloudland Canyon State Park in Georgia, if you've got a big river that's draining these huge tectonic mountains that's coming down, when it's in the mountains, it's very steep gradient, and the river can carry a lot of these hunks of rock because it has speed and power. Once it gets down to the more wide parts of the river, as it widens out, the river velocity slows down, and slowly but surely these bigger pebbles drop out because they're heavier and the river can't carry them anymore. As the river widens out and slows down even more, the sand drops out, and that usually happens in a coastal plain setting, I guess, right when you're fairly close to the ocean. And then when the river dumps into the ocean, it has a little sand left. Mostly it's got silt and clay particles that are dumped out into the continental shelf, the proximal continental shelf, the part of the continental shelf that's fairly close to the land, and that we call that a river delta type deposit. Okay. Oh, did I say this was a sedimentary rock? Yes, a sedimentary rock. So anyway, let's say you have some geologic strata of sedimentary rock. You've got a layer of shale or slate covered over by a layer of sand or sandstone, covered over by a layer of ancient river bottom that's turned into river conglomerate. Well, you can tell because of that sedimentary sequence, you can tell that represents a river that has been dumping out into an estuary and an ocean, river delta. Okay, here's our next rock. Okay, first thing that you notice is what? Very thin. Very thin. It breaks into these thin plates. To me, it looks like a mud. Well, let's see if it's soft. Look at that. My thumbnail can scratch it, so it's pretty soft. So it was mud, but it was pressed down and hardened a little bit, but not terribly. So what are we going to call this? Very, very thin, very small particles make up this sedimentary rock, and we're going to call it shale. It's what happens when mud gets covered over by other layers and pressed down and packed down, and it forms a sedimentary rock called shale. This shale has a huge amount of iron in it, and I think that's why it's kind of reddish tan in color. This is Cambrian shale. It's either Coosa shale or Rome shale, and it represents the Cambrian. It's part of the Cambrian rift-to-drift sequence. So this sequence of sediments, the rift-to-drift, tells you that oceans were rising during the Cambrian period. So first, when an ocean rises, first you have the sand beaches, and down here in Georgia, that would be the Chilhowie sandstone. As the ocean rose, mud covered those beaches, and that would be the Coosa shale and the Rome shale here. And then as the sea rose even further, limey mud full of calcium carbonate covered the mud, and that became limestone. So that's called a transgression or transgressive sea. That happened all over North America during the Cambrian period, which was about 550 to 500 million years ago. Okay, here's another one. Dark grayish material. Look at that. Pretty cool, huh? What does that look like to you? Let's flip it. So once again, thin layers. Look at this. Look at that. So you probably know by now that this is shale, because fossils, which this is all fossil stuff, fossils form best in shale deposits, muddy deposits. They can also, and that includes limey mud of limestone. So this is shale, yes. This is not Cambrian shale, though. And how do scientists or geologists know this is not Cambrian shale? Because of where it was in the rock layer, the rock sequence, but also the fossils of these plants. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to find it. Oh, it's on this side. There's no doubt about it that, look at that. Isn't that so cool? That these are fern fossils and others. Where's that bit? Oh, yeah, here it is. See these ferns? So we know that back during Cambrian time, the rift-to-drift sequence, ferns didn't exist. When did ferns become? As a matter of fact, during Cambrian time, there was nothing growing on the land. When did ferns come in? Well, around Devonian time and after. So we know this shale is younger than Devonian. Devonian was about 400 to 350. And as a matter of fact, this is Pennsylvanian shale. Pennsylvanian shale. That means it's associated with the coming together of supercontinent Pangaea and the Alleghanian orogeny, just like the sandstone that we looked at earlier. So what you had was in Africa crashed into ancient North America, pushed ancient North America down. A big ocean basin formed to the west of ancient Africa. And first, some limey mud was deposited in parts of that basin, and also dark mud was deposited in other parts, deeper parts of the basin, and then came a whole bunch of grayish mud that was washed down and had all kinds of organic material like fern bodies in it, and that would be this, where this material came from. And then after that, the rivers brought down sand, and that came on top of the mud, on top of the gray mud, which was on top of the limey mud or limestone. And then finally, river conglomerate covered that. And this whole sequence was moving from the huge Alleghenian mountains all along the eastern seaboard, the eastern Piedmont terrain, which was greatly covered by these mountains, and it was eroding down toward the west and the southwest. Hope that makes sense. If you take this stuff, if you take shale and you add a bunch of metamorphic pressure to it, it becomes this rock. And let's just see, first of all, can I scratch this with my thumb? I can. It's not as easy to scratch as the Conosaga shell, but I can scratch it, and a nickel will scratch the heck out of it. This rock, which is also thin plates, not as thin perhaps, and it's a wee bit shiny here. The shell was not shiny at all. This is a little shiny, not too shiny. Can I scratch this with my thumb? No, not really. A nickel might scratch it. You guys probably know what this is. The metamorphic version of shale, which is slate. Little scratches? No, not really. Slate. So you metamorphose, you subject shale to metamorphic pressure. You bury it under the shale under mountains of sediments. It's pushed up into folds and faults, and that turns it into slate, a metamorphic rock. Where do you find metamorphic rocks in the eastern United States? Well, you find them wherever pushing and shoving has occurred. All of the Piedmont physiographic province has tons of metamorphic rock. The mountains, eastern mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Unicoi Mountains have metamorphic rock. Then you get to the Valley and Ridge province, and that's the place where most of the pushing and shoving stops. So the Valley and Ridge province is mostly sedimentary rocks, and of course the Cumberland Plateau is very slightly folded, but no metamorphic rocks that I know of that are there. Okay, guys, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Happy rock hunting. Stay warm. Pop out.